Hey friends, welcome to the Holy Ourselves podcast, a podcast about becoming more authentic in our faith, especially around our sexuality and gender, as we figure out what it means to be whole before God, ourselves, and others in the midst of this crazy world. This is episode 15 and the beginning of season 2. Now, if you are a listener of Life on Side B, you are used to my previous podcast, which operated by seasons. And I want to clarify something right away. These seasons here won't work like the seasons previously. On Life on Side B, we centered each season around a theme. And it was very helpful, and I loved it. I think it was great. I wouldn't change it, except for now, there was also ways that it was restricting in the understanding that when we had things we wanted to talk about, we had to decide were we going to break the theme, were we going to try and force it into the theme. And I want it to be able to flow a little bit more. With Holy Ourselves, seasons will organize conversations around the year, not by topic so much. Now, granted, probably you're going to find themes within the topics because usually within a year, there are themes that come up, but there's not going to be a specific thing that we're going to be talking about. And then that gives us room to actually talk about what's going on and what's happening and what I want to talk about, when y'all want to talk about. So it's going to make it a lot more fun. Also, you probably will notice that I am in a new studio. So welcome to my office. This is, you're going to notice some adjustments. So even in the first 2 episodes after this, if you're watching on YouTube, obviously, I think most people don't watch on YouTube, but again, this is me trying to see if this is worth doing or not. I've been jumping around a little bit with spaces to record in. This is probably going to be my space for at least a good while. But even I'm going to probably be playing around with the angles and the lighting and all of these things. So if you are watching on YouTube, then you get to be along for the journey. But I feel like I've done, look at this. Yes, I practiced. I read things to try and put together this backdrop. And so I hope you enjoy it. Most of these books are like my books. Actually, no, all of them are my books and pieces and things. And Christian helped me pick out these plants. I love this one. I don't know what it's called, but I love it. So this is the space. And just, it felt like a good moment to be able to switch it up and allow for a new space. So here we are. Before we jump in, I just want to say that you can support this podcast by becoming a patron. For 3rd tier patrons, I've been sharing drafts of upcoming resources I'm working on. And actually, I've promised drafts at least every quarter. But honestly, recently I've been on a writing kick for some upcoming stuff, and I'm planning to kind of more share monthly. So the idea is that you guys can read some things, give me your feedback. What is shared is not necessarily going to be what ultimately happens, but share with you guys a little bit about my process. And if you are interested in that, please come by. But you can join at patreon.com/Holy Ourselves for as little as $5 a month, but more. And also, there's bonus episodes and bonus interviews and those things. And it just helps to make this more viable for me to put more effort into. So I appreciate all of you who are there supporting that and joining in on the fun. Today's episode is I'm going to hop around to a few different things, but there's going to be some core themes that I want to talk to you guys about as we jump into the new season. And I wanted to begin this season by talking about something a little bit heavier. I felt compelled to name something that's been on all of our hearts lately, which is the tragic murder of Renee Good. Now, I've said before, this is not a political podcast, but, and this is a big but, I don't believe we can talk honestly about queer lives without talking about politics. It's just like impossible. I really had hoped there was a moment, whether innocently or not, I was hoping we were moving away from so much culture war around LGBT lives in our country, and that quickly faded away. Politics shapes everyone's lives, and LGBTQ lives are constantly caught up in the crossfire. And if you're not familiar with the case that I'm referring to with Renee Good, which I'm sure most of you are, Renee Good was murdered by ICE agents in Minneapolis 3 weeks ago, something like that. DHS and the Trump administration claimed she was a domestic terrorist trying to run over an ICE agent, but footage has been released from almost every single angle, bringing strong contradictions to that narrative. Absolutely, it's absolutely false. And what she was attempting to leave the scene, and the officer in front of her moved out of the way and was able to shoot her even at a 90-degree angle through her window. And it's horrific. If you've seen the videos, it's just heart-wrenching to see that this is happening in our country. And Christians have, I believe Christians are called to mourn the loss of life, because this is ultimately what empires do: Babylon, Rome, and America. Christians have always learned how to live faithfully in the midst of the shadow of the empire. And I think this is one of the reasons why I want to name this, because we are in this podcast exists within the intersection of queer lives and Christian faith. And Renee Good was queer herself. And I'm not saying that's why she was murdered. This is a detail that I've been talking with a few people, and it's been interesting to notice in the news how often her wife is overlooked when talking about her life, when talking about Renee's life. That it talks about the children she leaves behind, and even her former husbands, and all of these different things. But her wife is not mentioned where it normally would be mentioned if she was in an opposite sex relationship. And that's not a small thing, I do not believe, because I can't stop thinking about her wife, like sitting next to her as she dies and then being erased in the process after. And I don't want to speak for her, but I do think this is a pattern that happens with queer people, that not only do we get shamed, but often that there is a form of erasure that happens consistently, even in the midst of, whether it's because people don't like us or they somehow think it's going to make us more palatable and more sympathetic if that detail is brushed to the side. And so many of us create chosen family, especially after our biological ones just fracture and fail. And yet in moments of tragedy, we often aren't treated as real family. And this is a core issue for the fight of civil rights that has been happening in our country, even around civil same-sex marriage, that queer partners were kept out of the hospital rooms as their loved ones died, as their partners died. And while marriage equality does exist, this problem hasn't disappeared. It shows up in the form of other partnerships, of other chosen families that exist outside of the structure of marriage. Especially, we see this among celibate queer Christians a lot, but I think all of us as queer Christians, our family structures rarely fit even within the bounds of marriage structures. And so we see some of the ways of how tragedy really reminds us of the difference, really reminds us of the ways that these structures don't work in our favor. And I think what is exhausting to watch is both culture and the church trying to control how queer lives are named, if they're named at all. Often the church would rather just our queerness be entirely erased. And so, shifting gears a little bit, because this kind of plays into some of the other things. That was not something I was originally planning to talk about, but it felt it weaves into what I've been meaning to talk about, which is, okay, has everyone watched Stranger Things, the finale, the final season? If you haven't seen the final season, you may want to skip ahead. I'm probably going to bring it up a lot. You may want to wait to listen to this or watch this until you have watched it. But there's the storyline around Will's sexuality. And this was so fascinating to not only watch on the screen, but to watch people's reaction to it. Like, so Will realizes, I mean, I guess he probably knew beforehand. You guys can give me your thoughts on this. If this is something that he suddenly realized in the final season, or if he knew it beforehand, was Will realize that Vecna is exploiting his fear of coming out, his fear of the rejection in order to control him. And the only way to defeat Vecna is for him to face that fear. And so Will ends up coming out to his community and his family. And Will's sexuality has been a theme throughout the entire series. It's not been subtle. I mean, even just from earlier when all of the guys are getting girlfriends and Will's getting upset, and then Mike goes, don't be upset with us because you don't like girls. I think what's really fascinating to watch is how Christians have responded to this narrative, claiming that the Duffer Brothers forced it into the story. And I'm honestly usually one of the first people to critique forced queer representation, because I think obviously media does it a lot. Like, really, why is this person queer? And the ways it goes about it. I mean, I'm all for queer characters. Love it. But is it the intentionality within the story? Was this initial thought, or was this just you trying to, diversify for your fan base at the last minute after you've already written the story? That kind of thing. And so I'm usually pretty critical of those things, but this was the least forced narrative in TV. It was really well played out throughout all of the seasons. I know that there's a lot of critiques around the finale, but I do not think Will's sexuality was one of them. I mean, even just the storyline of why am I forgetting her name? What is her name? Oh my gosh, the other queer woman. What? Okay, one second. I have my computer here. I'm going to look this up while we're on here. Why am I forgetting it in her name? She's literally the best. Like, she is, you all know who I'm talking about, and you're probably yelling the name at me as I sit here. Robin. Gosh, Robin. Robin was the best. Even her whole storyline, she's in the narrative to support Will in his journey towards coming out, in his journey towards facing his fears. And Will has this whole storyline where his sexuality and the shame he experiences and the fear he experiences and the silence that he experiences is part of why Vecna chooses him, I would say, in this entire story. I mean, it's very clear in it. But many Christian commentators have been upset, I mean, are we so shocked by that reality? And then by the fear that he has to come out to his family. A lot of people have been like, oh, it's so dramatic. It didn't need to be that dramatic. Well, let me tell you two things about queer experiences. Number one, it is that dramatic, and it is that scary today. I mean, it doesn't matter where you are. Coming out is a scary experience because people are rejected every single day for coming out. And especially when you're in a small town. So that by itself, the time frame does not. I think people forget somehow that this show occurs in the 80s, like prime of the AIDS epidemic, when being queer, especially like a gay man, is just no. I mean, it's no small thing that after Will comes out, there is a scene where Mike and Will share a water bottle together. That's something that would have been so rare in the 80s. And I know that they didn't really, like, they definitely played up the 80s aspect of it, but they didn't necessarily play up the stigma around queerness, except for showing Robin and Will's hesitation and fear around coming out. That was the biggest thing. But what frustrates me is how often how often Christians want to erase queer experiences rather than look inward at the fear that's operating within inside of them about why it bothers them so much. Like, why does our very existence bother them? Because they will always come back to the safety of theological arguments. And I love theology, but you can't hide behind that in your emotions. And I am not trying to center the critics or the critiques, but the pattern I really believe matters. The pattern behind the erasure of Renee Good's wife, the pattern behind this kind of explosive, like pushback about Will's sexuality in this story. There are Christian voices who build entire platforms around critiquing others. Mocking, shaming, memeing, all under the banner of defending orthodoxy. And they refuse real conversations, claiming that it legitimizes heresy. It legitimizes opposing views. But I'm sorry, that's not courage. That's fear. And, I think Rosaria Butterfield is a really good example, because I had a rule on Life on Side B that we would not say Rosaria Butterfield's name. And a lot of it was I didn't want to give her publicity. I mean, so many of these critics, they build their entire brand on criticism in order to then get people to respond. So I didn't want to give that to her. And we did really well until she went onto a podcast and started making a joke about wanting to throw a brick at Nate Collins' head. Nate Collins is the president of Revoice. And it's not a joke. It's something that she has never apologized for or asked forgiveness of. And yet she comes at Christians like myself and others saying, we're not Christians at all. Now, granted, she can think whatever she wants. My faith has no bearing. It's not contingent on the approval of Rosaria Butterfield. But honestly, neither would I want it. She's true. Our faith is very different. Like, when she says that, I'm like, yeah, you're totally right. Our faith is very, very different. But she's not alone. There are a lot of other voices like this, and I don't need to name them. Again, I don't need to give publicity to any of them, but they make their entire identity about critiquing people and saying horrendous things of others who follow Christ. And these are people who profess to be faithy leaders, yet they show no character of it. And what I find super fascinating is that, like I was saying a little bit before, they hide behind their false righteousness, refusing to have conversations, because they say that if they were to have conversations with these people that they disagree with, it would legitimize this heresy. It would legitimize these opposing views. And that's absolute garbage. It's cowardly. It's just not real. And now you may think that the way I am talking now, that I have all these, that I'm like having all these people talking about me online. Funny enough, I really go under the radar and I don't mind it. I just don't think that people care about what I say, which love that. I mean, like critics. Great. I don't mind it. What bothers me is people who focus so much on these minute details, like salvation hinges on them. And like they talk about the definition of celibacy and identity language when they forget the meaning of Christ's teaching, which is that I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Like, you can have every T crossed and every I dotted when it comes to the law. And if you don't live by compassion and mercy, it's all meaningless. I think especially when you have the compassion and mercy for the less fortunate. You have nothing if you don't have those things. That is what Christ teaches us. So many of these Christians go after queer people like they are the enemy. But the reality is that it is not how Jesus works. One of the greatest issues some Jews had with Jesus was his silence on calling out the Roman Empire or the Gentiles as eroding the kingdom of God. Like, they wanted him to come at Rome and the Gentiles for saying, you are doing these horrendous things. Instead, he goes to the people among the Jews and calls them out for their hypocrisy, the religious leaders of his own people, and says, the way you are going about this is wrong. Now, the reason why I am posting this, why I'm talking on this so fervently, is because ultimately I do believe that we have to call out leaders for the hypocrisy. The two things I have to say here is that, first of all, the core piece that Jesus is calling out among the religious leaders is their legalism. Like, they think these Christian voices think that they're doing as Jesus did, but they're not. Because when Jesus called people out, he was calling them out for the legalism that drew them into this hypocritical thinking. In Matthew 23, Jesus says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to." And then earlier in Matthew 21, he also says to religious leaders, "Truly I tell you, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you. For John came to you to show you the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him. But the tax collectors and the prostitutes did. Even after you saw this, you did not repent and believe in him, or believe him." So while these people I don't even know if I want to call them Christian leaders. Are they Christian leaders? Whatever, these voices, these individuals, want to criticize the use of LGBT language, the use of identity, committed friendships, queer culture. It is queer people who are hearing the heart of Christ and following it. I see it every day. It is amazing to watch. Moving into in my second point, in Matthew 23, Jesus also says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside, you appear to be to people as righteous, but on the inside, you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness." Okay, so my second point here is that every year we get stories of Christian leaders caught in sexual scandals. Just earlier this month, Donnie McClurkin, a Grammy-winning gospel singer and pastor, was found to have sexually abused a young man over several years. He had written about his story, McClurkin did, stating that God had healed him from overcoming the, quote, curse of homosexuality. He had all of the same talking points as so many others before him, criticizing LGBTQ Christians as heretics and the enemy, while secretly abusing at least one young man that has come forward. Now, this is literally just one story of abuse and adultery and scandals. There are so many more. And Christians who hold to that same teaching, the ones who say that I am a heretic for identifying as gay or because of my partnership, these same people who have the same thinking as Butterfield and these other individuals will say, well, he's not one of ours, he's just one story. But how many stories do we need to have before it becomes evidence of something larger? Sadly, one thing that I have learned, and I hate it, is that the loudest voices against LGBT people usually are hiding something. Now, I'm not saying, often our joke is that they have internal homophobia. That can be true, but I don't even think it's always that. I believe that often the loudest voices of critique in these kinds of ways and these kind of sexual purity kind of things, and again, I mean, in some ways, sexual purity is great. Obviously, it is a value. But when it's this judgmental, it comes from this judgmental understanding. the loudest voices are usually hiding something in their lives. In general, I believe this is what Jesus is partially talking about with the whitewashed tombs comment. Like his statement about judgment, even about the log and the speck. We are to call people to repentance and self-reflection, but not before we do the work ourselves. And that's not just for them, that's for me too. Like we have to look inward. And sadly, it's not something Christians do a lot, especially Christian leaders often. Usually, though, it's because we don't know how to address those issues in our lives. So it's easier to point the mirror in the other direction. I don't believe it's always a conscious thing. Like, I don't believe it's something of like, oh gosh, I have this, I need to push it over there. Sometimes it's what we have learned, and we hope that by putting on a good front, that the inside will somehow change. Like I'm trying to do better on the outside because I don't know what to do on the inside. So I'm going to really direct forward and hoping that by my good deeds and by all of these things, that somehow God is going to change me. I promise you it doesn't work like that. It's heartbreaking how many pastors and just general Christians do not feel they have the space to be honest about their lives and circumstances. But why should they be more honest when you have denominations like the PCA saying simply having same-sex attractions disqualifies you from being a pastor? I don't know. That might be an exaggeration. I don't know what the actual rule is. I think it's like you can't even identify as same-sex attracted, whatever it is. I know Butterfield doesn't feel like you're supposed to be a pastor, even if you have same-sex attractions. No wonder no one around that kind of like framework can even be honest about their struggles. That's something that when people are in that situation and then they feel like they have to hold it in, ooh, that creates monsters. In case anyone listened to I think it was like 2 episodes ago, on the, how humans become monsters. Like, no wonder so many of these spokespeople aren't being honest about their lives, till it turns into abuse and scandal. That is why Jesus is pushing this idea of like this critique about the whitewashed tombs, about being beautiful on the outside and dead on the inside, because this is the way that this is the trend that religious leaders have fallen into. I'm going to be having in a few episodes a conversation with Karen Keene about an upcoming book that had come out that she was an editor on, around conversations across side A and side B. And in the conversation, we talk a little bit about pastors and how you get a lot of pastors that are Enneagram 3s and Enneagram 8s. We hate to be seen unpolished or without the answers because there's so much pressure for us to have it all together. Now, I am not saying any of this for the purpose of thinking that someone like Butterfield is going to be listening or whoever, and then suddenly be like, wow, Josh, you got me. Yeah, you know what? You're right. I've seen the light. I don't think that's going to be happening. If anyone's listening to this who is critical, like comes from that framework, they're just going to be listening to find critiques of ways to point about it. I mean, this is the whole thing about not being open for conversation. I would love to have a conversation with someone from that framework, but often that's not welcomed. But and if you are someone who maybe you see some of that in your own story about the fear of the inward part of your heart, and maybe your sexual secrets being seen, and you want to do self-reflective work, I really encourage you. Please, like, God's invitation of love is open to all of us. You're not an enemy. You're a human. Like, you're not evil. You're a human. So please, in that. I'm not doing this in that kind of hopes, but I hope there is something I hope you all can take from this. First of all, I want to say this for any pastors or leaders who are listening to actually listen. In my next episode, I will be talking with Mark Yarhouse about sexual identity especially new systems of identity. He has a new book coming out, emerging sexual identities. And so this is about sexual identities that are being morphed in today's culture, especially among young people. Apparently gay is an old term. We talk about this, but the first page I open up and it says like gay is an old term. And I was like, wow, Mark, you got to call me out like that. You have probably heard, so I'm going back to pastors, you have probably heard a lot of critiques about LGBTQ identities from Christian authors. Before any conversation about the morality of it, is important to realize that sexual identity is a construct. I do believe this is something that Butterfield and I can agree on, but just because something is a construct doesn't mean it's not real or avoidable. Like, money is a construct, but trying to live your life today without it, good luck. Capitalism is a construct. If you're in America, you're stuck in it. Credit cards are a construct. I don't know why everything I'm referring to is money, but yeah, there we go. But you get the point. There are constructs. These are constructs of our world. But just because something is a construct doesn't mean a person can just erase it from their life. Sometimes maybe in some ways some can, but that can't be an expectation of salvation or something, which is really elementary theology in a lot of ways, I would say. Just because something is a construct doesn't mean it can simply be erased with the wave of your hand. I really need you to understand this. Nationality is a construct. Also, identity evolves over time. Our relationship with our identities. I don't just mean like the labels change. I mean our relationship with those labels. I was born an American and I'm still an American, but my relationship with that identity has changed a lot, partially because I've lived out overseas, partially just because of everything going on. Our relationship with these identities changes. My relationship with my queerness is very different than it was 10 years ago. 15 years ago. We're not going to go further back than that. But I realized, wait, how old was I 15 years ago? Here we are. Often people go from being in a state of hyper-identification. Well, they go from the closet to hyper-identification before balancing out into wholeness, where sexuality is a part of their lives, but it's not everything. And it's not nothing either. What I find interesting about critiques of queer identity is that they will often say that you are identifying with your sin. That's like a big thing. You're identifying with your sin. You should be identifying as a child of God. Okay. But then they also want you to identify as this horrible sinner who has no value other than God. And this perspective is more captive to sin than LGBTQ identity. I am very absolutely convinced, because I understand I'm a child of God. Me identifying as a gay man makes no difference of that. It's just accepting reality. And similarly, these are all of these critiques of queer committed friendships. These critiques are often critiques specifically for queer celibate Christians, because I mean, God, these kind of critics, they would just they're very critical of celibate queer Christians. They won't even give the time of day to affirming queer Christians. There are fears of romantic substitution within queer committed friendships. But the reality is, all the church does here is critique without any development of solutions. And the church altogether has an underdeveloped theology of friendship and community as well. It lacks capacity to actually create community for anyone, like any people at all, for congregants. And what unsettles people isn't that queer Christians value friendship. It's that we take it seriously. I really believe that. Like, that exposes how thin our theology is of friendship, really is. Like, when I hear some of these critics of queer committed friendships talking about how they think we should see friendship, I'm like, that is so sad. That is really a sad theology of understanding. Like, my friends, I do life with them. I literally do life with them. And I believe that that's how it's meant to be. Granted, yes, are there other friends that I'm like, in community with? Maybe I don't see all the time. Absolutely. There are tiers of friendship. But when I say someone is my friend, that is not a small thing to say. So queer people only hear their experiences in the church through this lens of shame and secrecy and hypocrisy and judgment. And when LGBTQ people are told to not identify, which, come on, y'all, can we be real? Like, that's just telling people to shut up. The whole thing of just not identifying, because when you tell people they can't name their experiences, that they can't name something, then it will brood in their hearts like a secret. And that is when it gives rise to the scandals that happen in these leaders' lives. That's the evidence of what happens when you don't identify, when you don't be honest. If you don't name it, there's no shepherding of it, there's no discipling of it, but then it becomes the monster. And the reality is, our sexuality does not have to be a monster in our lives. Mine is not. Many others are not. It is a beautiful thing within our lives, and it can be. I know some of what I've been talking about has been pretty direct, and it may be a lot for some people. And I didn't decide to talk about this lightly. So I appreciate you all listening to all of this. For queer listeners, I just want you to know God is not confused by your story. Like, your identity shouldn't have to be a secret or a liability. And a question I have for us to reflect on, if you desire to reflect on it, I've been reflecting on it, is how do we walk forward in our spiritual formation, even in the midst of this kind of rhetoric, which sadly seems to just be getting louder right now? Depending on your context, it might be super loud. It might be from the people right around you. For me, it's a little bit on the peripherals, but it's there. It's real. And it's, becoming a reality. It's something that we all have to deal with. And I will not give in to the lie of this rhetoric, because ultimately it's hate. It's built on hate. Like, even when I am engaging with someone who is from this kind of understanding and is operating from this way, I don't want to have hatred towards them. I don't have hatred in my heart towards Rosaria Butterfield. She is my sibling in Christ. I think it'd be ironic if we're four neighbors in the kingdom. Let's go. Let's do it. Like, their teaching is wrong, but they are absolutely loved by God. It is something I will say. They are absolutely loved and adored by God. And I hope that they continue to grow in their own formation. I won't give in to the hate of that. And like I said, I mostly operate under the radar for it, and I would be happy to keep doing that. But so much of, I get a lot of questions about these kind of statements and about these people, and people send me stuff of like, oh, this person is saying this thing. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I'm not here to start critiquing or I'm not here to start responding to every single little person. If one of those people wants to talk with me, lovely. I would absolutely adore that. Please, come on, let's have a conversation. We don't have to agree. Hell, you don't have to think I'm a Christian by the end of it. That's not a problem. But I do believe that we build bridges by having those conversations. And sometimes I don't think that some things need to be conversations anymore. Like I was saying about LGBTQ identity, like, why are we still talking about this? But obviously we need to talk about it still. Like, it shouldn't. I feel like there is so much evidence that identity shifts over time. And just because LGBTQ identity didn't exist 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago, it exists now. That's the reality. So within this understanding, it's really important to talk about. And it's the reality. You can't just wipe it away and erase it. So I'm hopeful that leaders listening, you can understand that there is more nuance than some of the people that you're listening to are telling you about. And that also this idea of who is the villain and who is the hero, it's not real. Like, that is not how Jesus operates. He's critical of religious leaders, but that's the thing. He goes after religious leaders, and he also calls them to Christ. And so we are all invited into that. All of us are equally. And so please understand that for queer people, I just really hope you can build the resilience. You know, you don't always have to listen to it. You can shut it off. I know there's something within us that just like gears towards listening to this stuff that builds those really strong emotions of anger and frustration and even sadness. And I have theories on why that is. And there's probably a lot of research on it that I'm not going to go into, but I don't think that's always necessarily helpful. So sometimes I'm looking at it just so I can have a better understanding of what's going on in these conversations. And I'm like, I don't want to watch this. So ultimately ground yourself in the love of God. These are conversations I want to have this semester, this year on this podcast with people like Mark Yarhouse and Karen Keene and Dr. Mark Yarhouse and Karen Keene and so many other guests that are going to be coming on. I'm really excited for this semester. Why do I keep saying semester? This season, this year, these aspects. It's going to be a fun time. And I'm really excited to be on this journey with you all. So thank you for that. Thank you for being here with me. As we end today, I just want to let you know, I mentioned this, I think, in the last episode. I have created a SpeakPipe account where people can send voice messages in. If you have a question or you have a comment that you would like me to talk about or respond to in an upcoming solo episode, feel free to send it there. Or if you don't want to do a recording, you can just do the contact page on Holy Ourselves and just say, hey, I have a question for the podcast, and I will add it in. I would love to read it and respond to what are some of the things that you guys have are thinking about. So please, if you're interested, do that. As always, please push follow or subscribe wherever you listen and give us a rating and review. I would appreciate it. It's helpful for people. I know that it doesn't seem like it's helpful, but it is. It really is. Also, you can go to holyourselves.org if you are interested in spiritual direction or cohorts. I'm probably going to be working on a cohort for this year. Normally, I will have already announced it by now, but I haven't. There's been a lot going on. But I am looking forward to that. And then, as always, there's the newsletter that goes out every month on Substack. A lot of this is all in the show notes. And as I said at the beginning, you can support also by going to patreon.com/Holy Ourselves. Thank you all. Thank you to Transient Friends for the theme song. And I just pray a wonderful rest of January for you all. And as always, until next time, keep becoming.